Welcome to Mythical Lullabies. Tonight you find yourself not tucked snugly in bed, but perhaps in a strangely comfortable armchair, or maybe even on a particularly plush rug, nestled deep within the echoing silence of what feels suspiciously like the Vatican's secret archives. The air here is thick with the scent of aged parchment and forgotten dust motes dancing in the slender beams of light that pierce through high, arched windows. You trace the spines of towering shelves, each one groaning under the weight of centuries of whispers, decrees, and untold histories. Your fingers brush against a leather-bound volume, seemingly unassuming, its surface softened by time, its edges frayed like an old friend's favorite blanket. And as you lean in, a shiver tickles your spine because you're about to uncover something truly unexpected, something culinary, something utterly captivating. And well, let's be honest, you probably won't survive this journey with your usual level of wakefulness intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling particularly brave, or just a little sleepy, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're surrounded by history, an almost oppressive quiet that swallows every rustle of your clothing, every soft intake of breath. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, as it's now officially known, holds over 85 kilometers of shelving, packed with documents dating back to the 8th century. Imagine that for a moment. Enough paper to stretch from here to, well, quite a long way away, all whispering secrets that have been tucked away for centuries. It's an almost sacred space, usually reserved for scholars with special permissions. But tonight, you have unfettered access. You're not quite sure how you got here, but the dry, musty air fills your lungs, and the sheer volume of knowledge surrounding you is a dizzying, dreamlike sensation. Your fingers drift over a row of particularly thick tomes bound in what feels like pigskin, some in vellum, others in wood, covered with tooled leather. These aren't the familiar, comforting textures of modern books, but something raw, organic, and incredibly old. You feel a curious pull towards one specific volume, tucked away on a shelf that seems higher than the others, almost forgotten. It lacks the grandiosity of the other papal bulls or diplomatic correspondence. No ornate papal seal adorns its cover. No gilded lettering proclaims its importance. In fact, it looks rather plain, almost humbly so. It's bound in simple, dark leather, perhaps once a rich brown, now faded to an almost charcoal grey by time and neglect. There's a slight warp to its spine, as if it's been leaning precariously for a very long time, patiently waiting for someone to notice its presence. You reach up, the movement slow and deliberate in the profound stillness. Your fingertips graze. The rough, dry leather, dust, fine as powdered sugar, puffs gently into the air, catching the light like a tiny galaxy. You pull it out, the soft scraping sound surprisingly loud in the silence. It's heavier than you expect, a satisfying heft that speaks of many pages within. You cradle it in your arms, a forgotten relic now resting in your hands, its very weight a testament to the passage of time. And as you turn it over, you can just make out, pressed into the leather, a faint, almost entirely eroded symbol, perhaps a simple cross or a faded crest, but it's too indistinct to tell for certain. Then you notice it. Scratched, almost. An afterthought. On the very bottom edge of the spine, a single word, or what's left of one. Coquinarum. It's a Latin word, a faded ghost of an inscription, coquinarum. Of the kitchens, of cooking, your eyebrows probably do a little dance of surprise. A cookbook? Here? Amongst the chronicles of empires and the solemn pronouncements of popes? It feels less like a historical discovery and more like finding a beloved, slightly scandalous romance novel hidden in a theological seminary library. You half expect a sticky note inside with "Do not open until after Vespers" scrawled on it. This unexpected find highlights a peculiar truth about the Vatican archives. While historians still argue whether the most sensitive documents are truly accessible, the collection itself is incredibly eclectic, containing everything from Michelangelo's letters to King Henry VIII's annulment plea. It's not just solemn pronouncements, it's the everyday life, the practicalities, and yes, even the occasional culinary endeavor of 1,000 years of papal history. You wonder what other mundane yet fascinating records lie waiting to be rediscovered, perhaps a ledger detailing the exact number of cassocks laundered for Pope Leo VI or an inventory of papal slippers. The possibilities are truly endless and endlessly dusty. You carefully open the book, the ancient binding creaking in protest, a soft groan that sounds almost like a sigh. The air that escapes is rich with the scent of time, a unique aroma that's a mix of vanilla, decomposition, and something distinctly antique. The pages within are thick, handmade paper, creamy with age, their edges uneven, suggesting they were cut by hand. The script, you can see even from this initial glance, is dense, elegant, and entirely alien to modern eyes. A beautiful, flowing hand, probably from a monastic scribe, but challenging to decipher. You can tell, even before properly reading, that this isn't just a collection of simple stew recipes. This is something special, something forgotten. And you, my friend, are about to be the one to rediscover it. As the ancient binding groans, you gently, almost reverently, spread open the cover, revealing the inner secrets of this unexpected culinary treasure. The first thing that strikes you, beyond the scent of vanilla and centuries, is the quality of the pages themselves. They are thick, substantial, not the flimsy pulp paper you're used to. You run a careful thumb over the surface. It feels almost like fabric, with a subtle tooth to it, not perfectly smooth, hinting at the handmade process. This isn't vellum, which was animal skin and common for more expensive or official documents of the time. This is paper, but unlike anything modern. It's rich, creamy in color, and bears the subtle irregularities of individual sheets joined together, maybe even showing a faint watermark if you were to hold it up to a strong light. Perhaps a tiny papal tiara, or a saintly symbol, or even more mundanely, the mark of the papermaker's guild. Such watermarks, you recall, were like medieval trademarks telling you where and when the paper was made. It's fascinating, really, how something so seemingly insignificant can reveal so much about trade and technology in the 15th century. The ink itself, a deep, rich sepia, holds remarkably well, though some passages show signs of fading, perhaps from moisture or light exposure. Over the centuries, you can almost imagine the scribe, quill in hand, painstakingly forming each letter, perhaps late into the night by the flickering light of a candle, occasionally nodding off and leaving a faint, almost invisible smudge. You notice with a smile a few tiny, almost imperceptible splatters of ink on the margins, a testament to a less than perfect quill technique or a momentary lapse in concentration. These little imperfections are strangely comforting, humanizing the anonymous hand that penned these recipes so long ago. It's like finding a small coffee stain on a priceless historical document and realizing, they were just like us, caffeinating their way through deadlines. The script is a beautiful example of a Gothic textualis or perhaps a humanistic hand, common in the mid-15th century. It's dense, compact, every letter formed with deliberate precision, but without the ornate flourishes of later calligraphic styles. There are no grand illuminations, no elaborate capital letters painted in gold leaf or vibrant lapis lazuli, which might suggest this wasn't a luxury item commissioned by a wealthy cardinal. Instead, it's a working document, perhaps a compilation for a head chef or a master of ceremonies responsible for the Vatican's vast culinary operations. The margins are relatively narrow, indicating a desire to maximize space, to fit as much information onto each precious sheet as possible. It suggests practicality over ostentation, a very businesslike approach to documenting deliciousness. As you turn the pages, the content begins to reveal itself, structured in a surprisingly organized manner. There are headings, though not always, clearly delineated, and lists of ingredients, though without precise measurements. Take a measure of flour, it might say, as much as a small dog might eat, leaving you to ponder the exact dietary habits of medieval canines. Then, steps for preparation are outlined, sometimes with a delightful lack of detail that would send a modern recipe developer into fits of despair. Imagine trying to bake a cake with instructions like cook until done or add spices until it tastes right. It's an act of faith, really, to follow these instructions, a testament to the skill and intuition of the medieval cook who understood the implied knowledge. You notice that some pages are more worn than others, particularly at the bottom edges, as if they've been handled repeatedly, perhaps by many different sets of hands over the centuries. Maybe they held the most popular recipes, the ones called upon time and again for daily meals or special feasts. Or perhaps it's where the cooks habitually rested their greasy thumbs while consulting a particular instruction. There are no illustrations, no charming little drawings of plump chickens or steaming cauldrons, which is a bit of a shame for someone like you, who appreciates a good visual aid. But the lack of imagery only deepens the mystery, forcing you to conjure the medieval kitchen in your mind's eye, based solely on the evocative language. You can almost hear the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of fat, the murmur of busy kitchen staff, all emanating from these silent pages. It's a sensory experience holding this book. The very air around you seems to hum with the ghosts of past meals, the forgotten aromas of herbs and spices now long out of favor. You find yourself pondering the journey of this particular manuscript. How did it survive? Did it sit unnoticed in a dusty cupboard, or was it passed down from chef to chef, generation after generation, a closely guarded secret? Historians still debate whether specific scribal hands indicate a specific monastic order or region, but the particular neatness and consistency of this script might suggest a very disciplined environment, perhaps even a scriptorium dedicated to practical arts, not just theological treatises. It's a fascinating thought, a monastery buzzing with the delicious scent of cooking alongside the solemn chanting. One quirky tidbit about medieval manuscripts is their surprising resilience. Many survived not because they were meticulously cared for, but because they were often repurposed. Sometimes the parchment was scraped clean and written over again, a palimpsest, or the covers were reused. The fact that this cookbook, and ostensibly lesser document than, say, a papal bull, survived intact, speaks to its utility or perhaps its discrete value. You might even find a faint, earlier writing beneath the current ink, a ghost of another text, perhaps a discarded legal document or a fragment of a poem hidden beneath the recipe for what appears to be some kind of spiced fish pudding. It's a literal layering of history, often accidental. As you gently turn to the next page, your eye catches a familiar name. Apicius. Now, Apicius was a Roman gourmand, supposedly from the 1st century AD, whose cookbook, De Re Culinaria, is one of the very few surviving ancient Roman recipe collections. Finding his name or references to his work in a 15th century Vatican Cookbook suggests a continuity of culinary knowledge that spans over 1,000 years. It hints at a deep respect for ancient traditions, a recognition that the old ways of cooking held valuable lessons even in the bustling kitchens of the Renaissance. It's a delightful cross-temporal shout-out, like a medieval chef tipping their hat to an ancient food blogger. You wonder if this Apicius fellow would have approved of some of the adaptations. Probably not, he was notoriously picky. The pages feel cool beneath your fingertips, a quiet presence in the vastness of the archive. This isn't just a book of recipes, it's a window into the daily life, the palates, and the culinary philosophies of a bygone era. It's the hum and bustle of a thriving kitchen, the scent of a wood-fired oven, and the meticulous care of a chef, all encapsulated within these fading pages. And among them somewhere lies a recipe that was so utterly forgotten, so completely dropped from the annals of culinary history, that its rediscovery now feels like finding a lost constellation. You're ready to dive deeper into the ingredients, the techniques, and the very spirit of this forgotten meal. As you continue to turn the thick, creamy pages of the Vatican Cookbook, you begin to imagine the kitchens it once served. Forget your modern concepts of a cafeteria or even a Michelin-starred restaurant. The Vatican in the 15th century was a self-contained ecosystem, a small city within a city, requiring a continuous, substantial supply of food for its vast retinue of cardinals, bishops, scribes, guards, servants, and of course, the Pope himself. The daily bread here wasn't just a spiritual concept. It was a very tangible, logistical challenge. What would have been on the menu, generally speaking? For the majority, the diet was largely cereal-based. Bread was the cornerstone of every meal in various forms. Dark, coarse loaves for the servants, finer, whiter bread for the higher clergy. You'd likely find copious amounts of pottage, a thick, hearty stew made from grains, vegetables, and whatever meat or legumes were available. It was the original set-it-and-forget-it meal, simmering for hours, providing warmth and sustenance. Imagine the comforting, earthy smell of such a stew permeating the cold stone corridors on a winter's day. It was the kind of meal that really stuck to your ribs, mostly because it was probably made of ribs, or at least bone broth. Meat, for those who could afford it or had access, was a sign of status. Beef, pork, and poultry were common, but not in the daily portions we might expect today. For the privileged few, you might find venison or wild boar hunted from the papal estates, a true luxury. But even for the elite, there were strictures. The medieval calendar was riddled with fast days, Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Advent, Lent, and numerous saint days, meaning no meat. This was a mainstream historical fact that heavily shaped medieval diets. So, on nearly half the days of the year, fish became the primary source of protein. And not just fancy salmon, we're talking freshwater fish like pike, carp, and even eels, often salted or dried to preserve them. You can almost smell the brine from here. Vegetables were seasonal and local: cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, and various root vegetables that could be stored through winter. Fruits like apples, pears, and plums would be eaten when in season, or preserved by drying. Spices, though, were a different matter entirely. While common folk used local herbs, the Vatican, with its immense wealth and international connections, would have had access to exotic spices from the East: black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, saffron. These weren't just for flavor, they were symbols of wealth and status, often believed to have medicinal properties or to aid digestion. You see notes in some medieval texts about how spices would heat the stomach or cleanse the humors. It's a wonder they didn't just sprinkle cinnamon on everything and call it medicine. Actually, they probably did. The structure of the Vatican's kitchen staff would have been immense. You'd have your head chef surrounded by a legion of undercooks, scullery maids, butchers, bakers, and even specialized roles like the master of the pantry or the carver. It was a well-oiled machine, responsible for feeding hundreds, if not thousands, of mouths daily. The kitchen itself would have been a hive of activity, open hearths for roasting, enormous cauldrons hanging over fires, preparation tables piled high with produce and meat. Imagine the noise, the heat, the constant motion. It was probably less like a peaceful culinary retreat, and more like a high-stakes, perpetually smoky medieval battleground. But instead of swords, they wielded cleavers. And then there's the quirky tidbit that always gets you: the medieval fascination with subtleties. These weren't just decorative centerpieces. They were elaborate, often edible, sculptures typically made of sugar paste, marzipan, or wax, depicting everything from mythical beasts to historical scenes. They served as entertainment and a display of the host's wealth and wit. Imagine a life-sized sugar dragon breathing real smoke, or a marzipan tableau of the Pope defeating a mythical beast, all meant to be eaten, or at least admired, at a grand banquet. You have to wonder how many guests accidentally tried to bite into a wax cardinal. It was the original edible art, centuries before anyone thought of a fondant cake. As you sift through the pages, you notice recipes that are clearly intended for such grand occasions nestled alongside more humble fare. You can almost categorize them: the recipes for daily sustenance, the recipes for holy days and fasts, and then the truly extravagant recipes for feasts and diplomatic receptions. The transition from mundane to magnificent is often seamless, as if the scribe merely moved from one day's meal plan to the next. One persistent scholarly debate revolves around the actual nutritional value and average caloric intake of the medieval diet. Some historians argue that it was often unbalanced and led to widespread malnutrition, especially among the poor. Others suggest that, particularly in wealthy households like the Vatican, the diet, while different from ours, could be quite varied and robust, providing ample calories and nutrients, especially when you factor in the sheer quantity of food consumed during feasts. It's not just about what they ate, but how much and how often. You can practically hear the historical arguments about whether medieval folk were perpetually hungry or perpetually stuffed. You continue to pore over the inventory of ingredients mentioned. There are local cheeses, cured meats, fresh eggs, honey, and a variety of grains beyond just wheat: oats, barley, rye. They also mention various types of game birds: pheasants, partridges, quails, even peacocks, which were often served with their feathers reattached for dramatic effect. Yes, you read that right. Imagine a whole roasted peacock placed on a platter, looking as if it's merely fallen asleep on its side, still fully feathered. It was definitely a different era of presentation. You almost expect to find a recipe for slightly burnt peacock, still with all its feathers, served with a side of regret. The presence of freshwater fish, as opposed to solely sea fish, also tells a story. It speaks of a reliance on local waterways and ponds, perhaps even fish farms maintained by the Vatican itself or nearby monastic communities. This self-sufficiency was crucial in an era where transport was slow and unreliable. The logistics of feeding such a large and important establishment were a constant, enormous undertaking. And the cookbook in your hands, plain as its binding may be, was clearly an essential tool in managing that gargantuan task, a silent testament to the daily grind of medieval hospitality and survival. You can practically hear the chefs shouting orders, the clanking of metal, and the general cacophony that must have filled these sacred kitchens. As you delve deeper into the cookbook, the quiet reverence you felt for its age gives way to a new challenge: deciphering the script itself. This isn't just about reading faded ink, it's about navigating a labyrinth of medieval handwriting, a puzzle of elegant loops and sharp angles that feels both beautiful and utterly impenetrable. You lean closer, perhaps adjusting an imaginary pair of scholarly spectacles, and the faint scent of old paper intensifies. The script, a sophisticated blend of Gothic textualis and early humanistic hand, is a masterclass in penmanship for the 15th century, but a nightmare for modern eyes. Each letter is meticulously formed, yet they often flow into one another, creating a dense, almost unbroken line of text. There are no consistent spaces between words, no clear separation between sentences, and punctuation appears to be an optional extra. Used with the enthusiasm of a medieval dentist, it's like trying to read a continuous winding river of ink, where the fish are words and the rocks are paragraphs, and you're just trying to figure out where one ends and the next begins. Then there's the delightful unpredictability of medieval spelling. Forget everything you learned about standardized orthography. In the 15th century, a word could be spelled 3 different ways on the same page, or even within the same sentence. It was a glorious free-for-all where scribes seemingly invented new ways to spell common words just to keep things interesting. You'd encounter abbreviations so cryptic they feel like secret codes. A tiny squiggle above a letter might mean or con, or us, depending on the context and the scribe's personal preference. It's enough to make you wonder if they were intentionally trying to frustrate future historians, or if they simply had better things to do than worry about consistent vowel placement. It's a bit like trying to read your teenager's text messages but in Latin and written with a quill. You just know you're missing something important. To truly understand this ancient text, you'd need a deep immersion in paleography, the study of old handwriting, and an intimate knowledge of medieval Latin. You'd be consulting thick lexicons, not just for basic vocabulary, but for culinary terms that have long fallen out of use or shifted in meaning. What precisely was allium versus cepa? Was poma always apples or sometimes other fruits? And what exactly did to temper truly entail when applied to a savory dish? Historians still debate the precise dating of undated manuscripts based purely on script styles, as regional variations and individual scribal quirks can make definitive attribution a challenge. You feel a pang of sympathy for them trying to nail down an exact year from a mere flourish. The physical state of the manuscript adds another layer of complexity. Some pages are discolored, stained by spills from long-forgotten sauces or wine, blurring the elegant lines of the script. Others have wormholes, tiny, intricate tunnels that snake through the text, devouring letters and words, leaving tantalizing gaps in the recipes. Imagine trying to follow a recipe where take one wormhole and another wormhole, it until more wormholes. It's a true test of contextual understanding and a profound exercise in historical guesswork. You half expect to find a note in the margin that reads, "Warning, this page tastes vaguely of parchment worms." Yet amidst these frustrations come moments of pure triumph. You trace a particularly challenging ligature, where 2 or more letters are joined together into a single character, a common quirky tidbit of medieval scribal practice. And suddenly, the meaning clicks. A phrase, previously nonsensical, blossoms into clarity. You recognize the name of a familiar herb, or a cooking technique that echoes through culinary history. It's like finding the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle, or finally understanding that one line of poetry you've always struggled with. These breakthroughs are immensely satisfying, small victories against the relentless march of time. You manage to pull together enough context to understand the general categories of recipes. There are sections for meat dishes, fish, pastries, and even what appear to be simple desserts or confections. You see references to pulmentum, a kind of thick gruel or pottage, pastillum, a small pie or pastry, and ingredients like piper, pepper, crocum, saffron, and various herbae, herbs. The language is often direct, utilitarian, but occasionally a poetic turn of phrase emerges, hinting at the scribe's own enjoyment of the culinary arts. Perhaps the scribe hummed a little tune while writing down the instructions for a particularly delightful tart. One mainstream historical fact that becomes abundantly clear is the lack of standardized grammar and spelling in medieval times. Scribes often wrote phonetically or according to regional dialect. This isn't laziness, it's simply how written language evolved before the advent of the printing press forced a degree of consistency. So, what looks like an error to you is simply a reflection of the linguistic landscape of the era. It also means that every manuscript is unique, a singular snapshot of language in motion, making the work of paleographers both challenging and endlessly fascinating. You realize that modern spell checkers would have a full-blown existential crisis if they encountered these pages. You find yourself slowing down, allowing your eyes to adjust to the rhythmic flow of the script. You no longer try to rush, but instead surrender to the pace of the past. The effort of deciphering becomes a meditative act, drawing you deeper into the world of the cookbook. Each line read, each word understood, feels like a direct communication. Across centuries, a whispered secret from a forgotten kitchen. You're not just translating, you're communing with history, syllable by painstaking syllable. And as you continue to turn the pages, a particular recipe begins to catch your eye, not just for its faded elegance, but for the unusual combination of words, hinting at something truly extraordinary hidden within its ancient instructions. As your eyes finally adjust to the dance of medieval script, a particular recipe begins to stand out, drawing your gaze like a flickering candle in the vast, dim archive. It's not immediately obvious why. Perhaps it's the way the heading is. A little bolder, or the ingredients are listed with an almost whimsical air compared to the stern practicality of the others. You find yourself lingering on this page, a slow, dawning realization washing over you that this isn't just another pottage or roasted fowl. This is something else entirely. The first thing that piques your curiosity is an ingredient that seems utterly out of place. Most of the recipes list common European staples, perhaps a few imported spices. But here, nestled amongst the usual suspects of flour and eggs, you encounter a reference to something that makes you pause, tilting your head slightly. It's a word that, even in its medieval Latin form, doesn't quite fit the culinary landscape. You've come to expect. Let's just say it's not saffron, which was rare and expensive, but at least comprehensible. This is different. It feels like finding a recipe for tacos in an ancient Roman cookbook. Your brain does a quick double take, trying to reconcile the familiar with the wildly unexpected. You reread the line, tracing the letters with your finger. Yes, it's there. Clear as the faint, age-old ink allows, this peculiar element is mentioned, not as a garnish or a minor flavoring, but as an integral component, central to the dish. Historians still argue whether the true purpose of certain mystery ingredients in medieval recipes was always culinary, or sometimes medicinal, symbolic, or even purely for show. Sometimes these ingredients were less about taste and more about visual impact or perceived magical properties. Imagine someone putting ground-up unicorn horn in a stew just because it sounded fancy and might cure the plague. The method, too, starts to diverge from the standard medieval fare. Instead of simply boiling or roasting, there are instructions for a meticulous, multi-stage preparation that seems unnecessarily complex for a mere meal. There's a process of infusion, then a period of setting, followed by a delicate layering. That sounds more like alchemy than cooking. It's less chop and stir, and more perform a sacred ritual involving fire and patience. You get the distinct impression that this isn't something whipped up on a Tuesday evening when you're feeling a bit peckish. This is a project, a quest, a culinary pilgrimage. You also note the lack of traditional measurements, which is par for the course for medieval recipes, but here the phrasing is even more poetic, almost metaphorical. Instead of a handful, it describes quantities in terms of as much as a dove might drink, or the weight of 3 gold florins. It's incredibly charming, but entirely unhelpful for a modern chef trying to scale the recipe. You imagine trying to explain to a modern baker that they need the joy of a newly betrothed couple in their pastry. They'd probably just hand you a tranquilizer. The mainstream historical fact here is the importance of status foods in medieval society. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a potent symbol of power, wealth, and social standing. The more exotic, rare, or difficult an ingredient was to obtain, the higher its status. This particular ingredient, while peculiar, certainly fits the bill for exclusivity. It suggests this dish was destined not for the common table, but for a very specific, high-ranking individual or a truly momentous occasion. Perhaps it was meant for a papal banquet, a celebratory feast after a crucial diplomatic victory, or even a private ceremonial meal for a very select few. And then there's the quirky tidbit that ties into this odd ingredient, a medieval belief in the doctrine of signatures. This was the idea that plants or substances that resembled certain body parts or ailments could be used to treat them. So a walnut, which resembles a brain, might be good for head troubles. A yellow plant might cure jaundice. This thinking often extended to food, where the appearance or perceived origin of an ingredient might dictate its use, regardless of its actual taste or nutritional value. You wonder if this odd ingredient in the recipe was chosen for its symbolic shape, or perhaps because someone believed it carried some arcane property. Maybe it was supposed to induce prophetic dreams or turn you into a particularly benevolent frog. The way the recipe is placed within the codex also feels significant. It's not at the beginning, nor buried at the end. It's almost in the middle, a hidden gem perhaps carefully placed to be easily found by the master chef, but not immediately obvious to a casual flick-through. You sense that this recipe holds a special significance, a forgotten secret waiting to be unveiled. It feels less like a simple recipe and more like an encoded message, a culinary riddle wrapped in an ancient parchment. The very paper seems to vibrate with a latent energy, the whispers of forgotten flavors and ceremonies clinging to its surface. You can practically hear the subtle hum of its secrets calling out to you. As you continue to pore over the intriguing page, the very title of the recipe leaps out at you, not because it's emblazoned in gold, but because its simple elegance holds a profound, almost mystical resonance. The faded ink, still clinging to the aged paper, spells out the name in a beautiful, deliberate hand, Lumen Papae. You whisper the words aloud, testing their sound in the profound silence of the archive. Lumen Papae. It rolls off the tongue like an ancient incantation. Your mind immediately leaps to its literal translation, Light of the Pope. Now that's not your everyday recipe title, is it? You don't often see Glorious Stew of the Duke or Bishop's Humble Porridge. Light of the Pope immediately suggests something far beyond mere sustenance. It implies illumination, perhaps spiritual insight, or even a literal glow. What kind of food could possibly be described as the Pope's light? Was it meant to be bright in color? Did it shimmer? Or was it, as often happens with medieval nomenclature, entirely symbolic, hinting at some deeper meaning known only to the initiated? It's enough to make you wonder if they were trying to cook up actual divine inspiration, perhaps hoping to clear up those pesky debates about theological minutiae. The name lumen papae immediately sets this dish apart from the rest of the cookbook's more straightforward entries, such as fish with green sauce or roast pigeon stuffed. It's not descriptive of the ingredients or the preparation method, but rather of its perceived purpose or a quality that transcends the culinary. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval dish names were often far more poetic and symbolic than our modern utilitarian labels. They could refer to the dish's appearance, its perceived health benefits, or even a moral allegory. Sometimes they were even riddles, a playful, quirky tidbit designed to entertain the diners. Imagine having to guess what dragon's breath actually meant before you took a bite. Good luck if it was just burnt toast. Your mind races trying to unpack the connotations. Is it light, as in weightless, ephemeral? Or light, as in providing enlightenment? Or light, as in luminosity? Perhaps a dish designed to literally glow. You picture a medieval banquet hall, dim and smoky from torches, and then this dish arrives, perhaps subtly radiating a soft, ethereal light. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, not a 15th century kitchen. The choice of pope also carries immense weight. It implies a dish of paramount importance, reserved for the highest spiritual authority, or perhaps served by the Pope on a special occasion. It speaks of a dish prepared with the utmost care, using the finest, perhaps even sanctified, ingredients. It wasn't just a meal, it was an experience, a statement. It makes you wonder if every time the Pope ate this, he felt a little bit closer to omniscience, or at least digestion. This grandiloquent naming convention raises an open scholarly debate, whether certain dish names refer to specific, literal ingredients, like golden eggs, meaning eggs with saffron, or are purely allegorical. Concepts like heavenly ambrosia being a particularly delicious pudding. In the case of lumen papae, the ambiguity is delicious. Is there a literal light element? Or is it merely meant to inspire a feeling of spiritual lightness and well-being in the pontiff? The answer, you suspect, lies deeper within the enigmatic list of ingredients and the convoluted preparation instructions. You feel a growing excitement, a tingling sensation of discovery. This isn't just a recipe, it's a forgotten piece of history, a culinary relic that holds a secret, perhaps a forgotten ritual, or a lost art. The light of the Pope implies something precious, something that needed to be preserved, perhaps even hidden. Was it too difficult to make? Did its ingredients become unobtainable? Or was its purpose no longer understood as the centuries passed? The very name suggests a reason for its disappearance, a sacred or rare quality that prevented it from entering the everyday culinary repertoire. You can almost hear the whispered conversations of medieval chefs discussing this dish in hushed tones, its reputation preceding it. Tonight, the Holy Father requests the lumen papae, one might say, and the kitchen would fall into a frenzy of meticulous preparation, every movement precise, every ingredient handled with the utmost care. It feels like uncovering the recipe for a legendary elixir rather than a simple meal. This isn't just a plate of food, it's a piece of Vatican mystique, solidified on paper, waiting for you to bring it back to life. The pages, once silent, now seem to hum with a latent energy, eager to reveal their luminescent secret. With the name lumen papae echoing in your mind, you naturally begin to wonder if this unique recipe has any culinary cousins out there. You instinctively start to cross-reference it with other known medieval European cookbooks from the same era, like the English Forme of Curie, the French Le Viandier, or the Italian works of Maestro Martino. You pull out other digital facsimiles, or perhaps in this dreamlike archive, new physical copies appear on your reading table, summoned by your scholarly intent. You're like a culinary detective, comparing fingerprints, searching for a match. You begin with the ingredients. Does that peculiar element, the one that initially raised your eyebrows, appear in any other contemporary texts? You scroll through pages of digitized manuscripts, searching for similar names or descriptions. You find lists of exotic spices, pepper, ginger, cloves, saffron, imported from distant lands and prized for their flavor and medicinal properties. You see references to various kinds of meats, fish, vegetables, and grains. But that specific ingredient, the one that makes lumen papae so distinctive, remains stubbornly absent. It's like searching for a unicorn in a stable full of very ordinary, albeit historically accurate, horses. You almost expect a medieval chef's note saying, ingredient X, NB, only found if you possess the Pope's actual light. Good luck with that. Then you examine the preparation methods. Do other recipes employ this multi-stage infusion, this delicate layering, this specific kind of setting process? You find plenty of instructions for boiling, roasting, frying, grinding, and sieving. You see recipes that require patience, long simmering times, or intricate shaping. But the precise sequence of steps outlined in Lumen Papae feels distinctly, almost ritualistically, unique. It doesn't quite fit the pattern of efficiency you often see in busy kitchen manuals. It hints at a specialized technique, perhaps one that was closely guarded or incredibly difficult to master, or even one that was so specific to a single occasion that it never made it into general circulation. The limited number of surviving medieval cookbooks is a mainstream historical fact that makes this comparative search both challenging and fascinating. Most of what we know about medieval cuisine comes from a relatively small collection of manuscripts, often reflecting the culinary traditions of royal courts, wealthy households, or monasteries. These books reveal distinct regional variation. The English loved their potages, the French their rich sauces, the Italians their fresh pasta and sophisticated use of herbs. Yet, even within these regional styles, Lumen Papae feels like an outlier. It doesn't quite conform to the typical flavor profiles or textural preferences evident in other Italian recipes of the period, which tend towards bold flavors and simpler preparations compared to this dish's apparent subtlety. You start to consider the possibility that Lumen Papae represents a highly specialized, perhaps even secret, culinary tradition within the Vatican itself. Perhaps it was a recipe known only to a handful of master chefs, passed down orally or within a very select group, never intended for wider publication. Or maybe it was created for a very specific, singular event, after which its purpose faded, and the recipe with it. This exclusivity would explain its absence from other common culinary texts of the era. It's like finding a recipe for a secret handshake, but edible. A quirky tidbit in the study of medieval cookbooks is the phenomenon of recipe borrowing or adaptation without attribution. Scribes and chefs frequently copied recipes from one another, often tweaking them slightly to suit local ingredients or tastes. You'll find similar recipes appearing in multiple cookbooks across different regions, sometimes with minor variations. Yet, Lumen Papae stands apart from this typical pattern of culinary exchange. It seems to have sprung forth almost fully, formed, a singular creation without obvious precursors or widespread derivatives. This lack of clear relatives makes its uniqueness even more pronounced. It's a culinary orphan, found only in this dusty Vatican tome. This uniqueness sparks an open scholarly debate. To what extent was there culinary exchange between different courts and regions in medieval Europe? While we know ingredients and ideas traveled, was there a cohesive European cuisine, or merely a collection of distinct regional styles that occasionally influenced each other. Lumen Papae seems to argue for a very specialized, localized culinary innovation, perhaps developed in isolation within the Vatican's walls rather than a broad trend. It suggests pockets of highly inventive cooking that didn't necessarily diffuse into the wider gastronomic landscape. As you conclude your comparative search, a sense of profound isolation settles around Lumen Papae. It stands alone, a singular, culinary enigma. No other cookbook from the period seems to contain anything quite like it. This isolation only deepens its mystery and reinforces your conviction that you've stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, a forgotten fragment of a culinary lineage that perhaps never fully materialized or was deliberately kept out of public view. You can almost feel the weight of its solitude, a silent testament to its singularity in the vast tapestry of medieval gastronomy. Its uniqueness makes it not just a recipe, but a historical whisper, a quiet challenge to our understanding of the period's culinary boundaries. The uniqueness of Lumen Papae makes perfect sense when you start to consider the larger context of food in the 15th century Vatican, and indeed in any powerful court of the Renaissance. This wasn't just about feeding people, it was about food as power and spectacle. An elaborate meal wasn't merely a culinary event, it was a grand performance, a carefully orchestrated display of wealth, influence, and authority. You can almost hear the trumpets announcing the arrival of each course, the hushed whispers of awe from the assembled guests. Imagine a papal banquet. It wasn't just a gathering for sustenance, it was a political arena. Every dish, every ingredient, every meticulously placed centerpiece was a statement. The sheer quantity of food, the rarity of the ingredients, saffron from distant lands, sugar in incredible abundance, exotic fruits, all served to broadcast the host's immense resources and connections. This is the very definition of conspicuous consumption centuries before anyone coined the term. A cardinal wasn't just offering you a meal, he was flexing his financial muscles, demonstrating his prestige, and subtly reminding you of his elevated status. It was a delicious power play where indigestion might very well be a sign of success. Theatricality was key. Feasts were multi-sensory experiences designed to dazzle and impress. Beyond the edible subtleties we discussed earlier, those incredible sugar sculptures of castles or mythological creatures, there would have been musicians playing, jesters entertaining, and often elaborate processions for each course. Sometimes birds would fly out of pies, or miniature ships would sail across tables laden with food. It wasn't just dinner, it was a medieval dinner theatre, but with higher stakes and considerably more meat. You might even find yourself seated next to a live badger if the mood struck your host as particularly jovial. It made for excellent conversation, though probably not excellent table manners. The political implications of dining were profound. Seating arrangements at a banquet were meticulously planned, reflecting the precise hierarchy of guests and signaling alliances or slights. The quality of food, the wines served, the number of courses, all communicated messages of respect, favor, or even disdain. A well-executed feast could solidify diplomatic ties, sway political opinions, or impress visiting dignitaries. A poorly executed one could lead to scandal, insult, or even political repercussions. It was a perilous tightrope walk for any court chef, whose career, and perhaps even his head, might depend on the perfect roasting of a peacock. You also see this through the mainstream historical fact of sumptuary laws. These were regulations prevalent across medieval and Renaissance Europe that sought to control what people could wear, consume, or display based on their social class. While often difficult to enforce, they highlight the era's obsession with social stratification, and the belief that certain foods, fabrics, or luxuries were appropriate only for specific ranks. So, if you were a mere merchant, you probably weren't supposed to be eating swan or wearing purple silk, lest you confuse the social order. These laws inherently demonstrate how much wealth and status were tied to what one ate and how one feasted. Quirky, yet telling tidbit is the role of tasters. In an era rife with political intrigue, particularly in the Vatican, where power struggles could be deadly, the concept of a food taster was very real. These individuals, often trusted servants, would sample each dish before it was served to the Pope or other high-ranking officials. It was a grim job, really, ensuring the food was safe, but it also underscored the constant tension and the immense value placed on the lives of those at the pinnacle of power. It's hard to enjoy a meal when you know someone else might be feeling a bit off from their first bite. The true impact of lavish spending on feasts on the economic stability of medieval and Renaissance courts is still an open, scholarly debate. Some argue that such expenditures, while ostentatious, stimulated trade, supported local artisans and farmers, and provided employment. Others contend that they were drains on state treasuries, contributing to debt and instability, particularly when rulers were already struggling with wars or other financial burdens. Was it a necessary investment in soft power, or merely reckless extravagance? Lumen Papae, with its likely expensive ingredients and complex preparation, would certainly fall into this category of costly culinary endeavors, a single dish embodying both potential diplomatic triumph and financial folly. Understanding this context helps you grasp why a recipe like Lumen Papae might have existed and why it might have been so carefully guarded or even forgotten. It wasn't just food, it was a symbol, a secret weapon in the arsenal of power. It was designed not merely to nourish, but to impress, to mystify, and perhaps to project an almost divine aura onto the pontiff who consumed it. This wasn't a humble meal, it was a statement etched in culinary form, a fleeting moment of edible grandeur that disappeared as quickly as it was consumed. As you meticulously follow the elegant curves of the script, the identity of that most intriguing ingredient begins to coalesce from the faded ink. It's not an exotic spice nor a rare animal part. It is, perhaps, even more remarkable in its simplicity and profound symbolism. Manna. You read the word, and a silent gasp escapes you, the sound swallowed by the cavernous archive. Manna. Not just the biblical miraculous food from heaven, but a real, tangible substance, harvested from the bark of ash trees, primarily in Sicily. In the 15th century, this sweet, crystalline exudate was a highly prized and expensive commodity, considered both a delicacy and a medicine. Its inclusion in Lumen Papae isn't merely unusual, it's a profound statement. It immediately elevates the dish from a mere culinary creation to something almost sacred, bridging the earthly and the divine. You picture medieval monks out with tiny buckets, hoping for a sap run from the trees, probably praying for it to rain sweets. It's not quite as easy as just popping to your local grocer, is it? The purpose of manna in Lumen Papae would have been multifaceted. Firstly, its delicate, almost ethereal sweetness would have been highly prized, far more subtle than honey, and utterly distinct from the newly available, but still coarse cane sugar. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, given the name Lumen Papae, is its symbolism. Manna was literally food from heaven, associated with purity, divine sustenance, and miraculous providence. To include it in a dish for the Pope, the vicar of Christ on earth, would have been a direct, powerful allusion to his spiritual authority and divine connection. It implies a dish designed not just to nourish the body, but perhaps to inspire the soul, or even to confer a sense of divine blessing. The challenges of sourcing and preparing manna would have been considerable. It was a rare import subject to the whims of trade routes and harvests. Its collection was painstaking, requiring skill and patience to prevent spoilage. Once acquired, it would have been carefully processed, perhaps dissolved or ground, to integrate its unique properties into the dish. Its very rarity and cost would have reinforced its status as an ingredient reserved for the most important occasions and the most important person. This underscores a mainstream historical fact. The global trade routes that brought exotic ingredients like manna from Sicily, but then distributed across Europe, and spices to Europe, were essential to high-status medieval cuisine, creating a hierarchy of ingredients based on their rarity and journey. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to manna is its perceived medicinal properties. Beyond its biblical fame, manna was widely used in medieval pharmacopoeias as a mild laxative and a demulcent believed to soothe internal irritations. Its presence in Lumen Papae might suggest not just a culinary purpose, but a subtle, restorative one, a dish designed to uplift and perhaps even gently cleanse the pontiff. You can almost imagine the medieval physicians nodding sagely, recommending a small portion of the light of the Pope for His Holiness's spiritual and intestinal well-being. It reminds you that food and medicine were often inextricably linked in the medieval mind, a concept that sometimes leads to truly bizarre prescriptions. An open scholarly debate centers on whether certain expensive or rare ingredients like manna were sometimes substituted with cheaper alternatives without explicit mention in medieval recipes. Would a resourceful Vatican chef, faced with a manna shortage, have dared to use highly refined sugar or even crystallized honey as a stand-in, hoping no one, especially the Pope, would notice the difference? This possibility adds another layer of intrigue to historical recipe reconstruction, forcing modern culinary historians to consider not just what was written, but what might have been done in practice. The very notion of such substitutions, perhaps to maintain appearances or simply to get the job done, makes you chuckle slightly at the ingenuity of medieval culinary pragmatism. So, the inclusion of manna isn't just a detail, it's the core of the recipe's identity. It transforms Lumen Papae from a mere dish into a spiritual statement, a culinary bridge between the earthly kitchen and the heavenly realm. Its presence hints at a profound meaning, a forgotten ritual, or a secret desire to imbue the pontiff with divine grace through his very sustenance. This isn't just about taste anymore, it's about symbolism, status, and the profound power attributed to nature's rarest gifts. Having unearthed the mystical manna, your focus shifts from what they used to how they actually cooked with it. You delve deeper into the cookbook's instructions for Lumen Papae, and suddenly, the entire world of the 15th century kitchen springs to life around you. This wasn't a sleek stainless steel affair with convection ovens and immersion circulators. This was a realm of open hearths, roaring fires, and a remarkable reliance on human ingenuity and muscle. Imagine the Vatican kitchen, a vast smoky chamber, probably with high ceilings to draw out the fumes. At its heart would be immense open hearths where enormous logs crackled and spat. Roasting would happen on spits, turned manually by kitchen boys, or sometimes charmingly, by specially trained dogs on treadmills. Yes, that was a thing. Boiling and stewing occurred in massive iron cauldrons suspended over the flames by chains. Baking, for things like bread or pastries, might happen in brick ovens built into the walls, or in portable Dutch ovens buried in hot embers. There were no temperature dials, no preheat settings, just the keen eye and practiced hand of a seasoned cook, judging the heat by instinct and the glow of the coals. It was less about precise measurements and more about a feeling, a culinary intuition, honed over years of scorched knuckles and perfectly rendered feasts. You realize your microwave would be utterly useless here. You couldn't even plug it in, let alone explain its function. The tools were equally basic, by modern standards. Wooden spoons, iron ladles, ceramic bowls, and heavy-duty cleavers were the order of the day. Grinding spices and nuts meant mortar and pestle, often done by hand for hours. Sieving flour involved shaking it through cloth or perforated parchment. Every task was labor-intensive, demanding a small army of kitchen staff. This reliance on human power meant efficiency was paramount, even if the tools themselves were rudimentary. As you look at the instructions for lumen papae, you notice it calls for several distinct, almost delicate, stages of preparation. It speaks of infusing the manna in a liquid, a process that would require careful, constant, low heat, perhaps in a covered ceramic pot nestled far from the roaring flames, or even in a double boiler over a gentle pan of water. This hints at a sophisticated understanding of heat control, even without modern thermostats. It's a skill that's largely lost to us now, where we rely on the precise numbers on our appliance dials rather than the warmth emanating from a specific corner of the hearth. Then there's a mention of setting the mixture, suggesting a chilling process. In a world without refrigerators, this meant creative solutions. Perhaps the mixture would be placed in a cool cellar, or even submerged in a well, or if it was winter, simply left outside. This need for specific temperatures, both hot and cold, reveals the profound skill required from medieval chefs, who were true masters of their environment. They were effectively medieval scientists experimenting with trial and error, passing down their empirical knowledge through generations of cooks. A mainstream historical fact about medieval cooking is the widespread use of mortrues, which were a type of finely pounded or pureed dish, often made of meat or fish, mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and spices. These were then molded or shaped, demonstrating a desire for smooth textures and elegant presentation. The setting and layering instructions for lumen papae suggest a similar, if more refined, approach to texture, aiming for a delicate, almost ethereal consistency far from the rough and tumble stews. For a quirky tidbit, consider the medieval food processor, the large mortar and pestle. While primitive, highly skilled cooks could achieve incredible textures by pounding ingredients for hours, often incorporating air to make them light and fluffy, almost like a whipped mousse. They even had specific types of sieves and strainers, some made of horsehair, to achieve very fine purees. It speaks to a dedication to refinement that belies the common misconception of medieval food as universally coarse and rustic. You imagine a medieval cook proudly showing off their perfectly smooth fish pâté, probably claiming it was lighter than a cherub's whisper. An open scholarly debate centers on the precise temperature control achievable in medieval ovens and hearths. How accurate could a cook really be? While we lack thermometers, archaeological evidence and textual analysis suggest that medieval cooks through experience could achieve a surprising degree of control, allowing them to bake breads, roast meats, and even prepare delicate confections without consistent scorching or undercooking. It was an art, not a science, but an incredibly effective art. So the preparation of lumen papae would have been a significant undertaking, demanding not just rare ingredients but immense skill, patience, and a deep understanding of heat and consistency. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a testament to the chef's artistry and the kitchen's capabilities, a quiet symphony of ancient culinary craft. With the ingredients and methods now somewhat clearer, you naturally turn your attention to the most tantalizing question. What did lumen papae actually taste like? Your modern palate accustomed to very different flavor profiles, struggles to truly grasp the nuances of a 15th century dish, especially one with such a unique star ingredient. But as you read, a picture begins to form, a fleeting sensory ghost of a meal. Given the presence of manna, you imagine a sweetness that is delicate, almost ethereal. Not the aggressive, cloying sweetness of modern refined sugar, but something more subtle, with faint, earthy undertones, perhaps a hint of caramel or maple. It wouldn't have been overpowering, but rather a gentle caress on the tongue. Coupled with any other subtle spices that might be listed, perhaps a hint of rosewater or a touch of rare, sweet ginger, used sparingly, the flavor profile would have leaned towards the exquisite and complex rather than the robust. It's definitely not a dish you'd pair with a side of chips. The texture, too, is a source of fascination. If the manna was dissolved and then allowed to set, you envision something, almost jelly-like, perhaps a delicate custard, or a refined paste, smooth and yielding. The light in lumen papae could refer not just to its potential luminosity, but to its lightness on the palate, a dish that felt insubstantial, yet profoundly satisfying. You might imagine something that melts away in your mouth, leaving only a lingering hint of its unique sweetness. It would be a stark contrast to the thick pottages and heavy roasted meats that typically dominated medieval meals, making it a truly refreshing and perhaps even surprising experience. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a culinary palate cleanser, but far more profound. Its purpose, you realize, extends far beyond simple nourishment. Given its name and its principal ingredient, lumen papae likely served multiple roles. It could have been a ceremonial dish presented on special liturgical occasions, symbolizing divine grace or heavenly bounty. It might have been considered a restorative, a delicate fortifier for the Pope after a long period of fasting or illness, leveraging manna's perceived medicinal properties. Or perhaps, and this is truly intriguing, it was specifically designed as a light meal for fasting days, a permissible indulgence that still honored the dietary restrictions. It wasn't meat, it wasn't dairy, it was essentially a light from heaven. Dessert that passed muster with the ecclesiastical rules. This makes you wonder if they secretly had a whole category of loophole foods for those difficult Lenten periods. A mainstream historical fact about medieval palates is their often striking preference for strong, often combined, flavors. Sweet and sour combinations were common, as were dishes that blended spices liberally with savory ingredients. While lumen papae might have been more delicate due to the manna, it would likely still possess a distinct, memorable flavor profile designed to make an impact. It wouldn't have been bland, certainly not. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, consider the medieval belief in the theory of humours. Food was thought to affect one's temperament and health by influencing the balance of 4 bodily humours: blood, sanguine, phlegm, phlegmatic, yellow bile, choleric, and black bile, melancholic. Manna, being light and gently sweet, might have been considered cooling or moistening, thereby balancing a hot or dry temperament. A dish like lumen papae could have been meticulously designed to promote a specific humoral balance in the pontiff, perhaps making him more calm, serene, or even more open to divine inspiration. It's like a medieval mood food, designed to optimize the Pope's internal equilibrium. An open scholarly debate among food historians is the extent to which medieval tastes truly differed from modern palates. Some argue that our taste buds have fundamentally changed due to industrial food processing and readily available sugar. Others suggest that while ingredients and preparation methods were different, the fundamental enjoyment of rich, flavorful, and skillfully prepared food remains constant across centuries. Lumen papae with its unusual mix of luxury and potential subtlety, presents a fascinating case study in this debate. Would a modern gourmet find it surprisingly appealing, or would its delicate sweetness and lack of immediate punch leave them utterly bewildered? Ultimately, lumen papae was likely a dish of quiet power, a subtle statement of spiritual connection and earthly luxury. It wasn't about aggressive flavor, it was about the nuanced experience, the symbolic resonance, and the delicate delight it offered to the most powerful figure in Christendom. It was, in essence, a taste of heaven, served right there in the heart of the Vatican. With a sense of its probable taste and purpose now forming in your mind, a new, equally compelling question arises. Why was lumen papae forgotten? How could a dish so symbolically rich, so uniquely crafted, simply vanish from the culinary lexicon of the Vatican, and indeed from history itself? You find yourself pondering the reasons behind its disappearance, a puzzle as intricate as the recipe itself. One primary theory revolves around the sheer rarity and cost of its key ingredient, manna. While it was available in the 15th century, its supply was never guaranteed, dependent on harvests from specific ash trees, primarily in Sicily. As trade routes shifted, as political instabilities waxed and waned, and as other sweeteners like cane sugar became more widely available, though still expensive, the consistent acquisition of high-quality manna would have become increasingly challenging and prohibitively costly. Imagine trying to run a bustling kitchen when your star ingredient is essentially a tree's unpredictable sap. It's like trying to bake a cake with a single, very shy, artisanal unicorn tear. Another contributing factor might have been the complexity of its preparation. As you noted, lumen papae isn't a throw-it-together on a Tuesday kind of meal. It required meticulous heat control, precise infusion, and careful setting, skills that, while achievable, demanded immense patience and highly trained staff. In a busy papal kitchen, where hundreds of meals were prepared daily, a dish that took hours, if not days, to assemble might have been simply too demanding for regular inclusion, even for special occasions. As tastes evolved and kitchens sought more efficient ways to produce grand feasts, such a time-consuming recipe might have simply been phased out for more practical alternatives. Consider also the changing religious and political climate of the Vatican itself. The 15th century was a period of immense upheaval, leading into the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. Popes changed, priorities shifted, and the very nature of papal authority and display evolved. A dish so heavily laden with specific, spiritual symbolism might have fallen out of favor as theological interpretations shifted, or as subsequent popes sought to project a different image. Perhaps a later pope preferred more earthly delights, or simply found the symbolism of manna a little too overtly self-congratulatory. A mainstream historical fact that sheds light on this is the cyclical nature of food trends. Just like today's kale chips or artisanal sourdough, certain dishes or ingredients gain immense popularity for a period, only to fade as new tastes emerge or as their novelty wears off. Medieval cuisine, while seemingly static to modern eyes, was constantly evolving. New world ingredients like tomatoes and potatoes, though not prevalent until later centuries, eventually revolutionized European diets, pushing older, less versatile dishes into obscurity. Lumen papae might have simply been a casualty of culinary fashion, a delicious but fleeting fad. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the concept of culinary secrets being deliberately lost or guarded. In some medieval guilds and aristocratic households, certain recipes were considered proprietary, passed down only through apprenticeship or within a family. If the master chef, who knew the precise nuances of lumen papae, died or left the Vatican without fully documenting or passing on his specific knowledge, the recipe might have become effectively lost in translation, or simply too difficult for others to replicate consistently. It's like a secret family recipe that no one wrote down, and now Aunt Mildred's amazing casserole is merely a delicious, albeit vague, memory. An open scholarly debate exists regarding the accuracy of recipe transmission. In handwritten manuscripts, did scribes always copy recipes perfectly? Were omissions or misinterpretations common, leading to a gradual degradation of the recipe over time until it became unworkable or unrecognizable? It's possible that even if the recipe was periodically copied, errors crept in, ultimately rendering lumen papae unmakeable, leading to its eventual abandonment. The fading ink and wormholes you observed might be literal metaphors for the decay of culinary knowledge through imperfect transcription. So, lumen papae wasn't likely deliberately hidden, but rather became a victim of circumstance. Its rare ingredient supply, its labor-intensive process, shifting political tides, evolving culinary tastes, and the inherent challenges of transmitting complex knowledge through handwritten documents. It simply faded, like a whispered secret carried away by the winds of time, waiting patiently in the dusty archives for you to uncover its delicious mystery. Now, with a comprehensive understanding of lumen papae, its name, its ingredients, its purpose, and the likely reasons for its disappearance, you face the ultimate challenge, bringing it back to life. You're embarking on an attempt at modern reconstruction, stepping into the shoes of a medieval chef, but with a surprising array of 21st century resources at your disposal. This isn't just cooking, it's historical forensics, a culinary séance. The first hurdle, naturally, is sourcing the ingredients. Manna, while rare in medieval times, isn't entirely impossible to find today. You might search specialty apothecaries, herbal suppliers, or even online retailers that cater to niche culinary or medicinal interests. It's a delightful irony that something so exclusive in the 15th century can now be found with a few clicks, probably shipped to your doorstep via a drone, a stark contrast to mule trains across treacherous mountain passes. However, ensuring its purity and authenticity, that it's truly the Fraxinus ornus exudate and not some cheaper substitute, becomes paramount. You wouldn't want to accidentally recreate Light of the Pope, but with a hint of dubious syrup. Then comes the real detective work, interpreting those cryptic medieval instructions. A measure as a dove might drink needs translation into milliliters or grams. Cook until done demands experimentation with modern temperature gauges and timers. You'd likely start with small batches, adjusting ratios, trying different cooking temperatures and durations, meticulously noting every variable. This iterative process, often frustrating but immensely rewarding, is the essence of historical culinary reconstruction. It's less like following a recipe and more like solving a complex, delicious riddle where the answer is edible. You'd also consider the likely texture. If the original dish was meant to be delicate and smooth, you might employ modern techniques like sieving through a very fine mesh, or even using a blender to achieve a velvety consistency. Something medieval cooks could only achieve through hours of laborious pounding with a mortar and pestle. While you're not trying to modernize the flavor, you are trying to recreate the intended experience of that texture with today's tools, acknowledging that the medieval palate might have appreciated smoothness in a way we take for granted. This highlights a mainstream historical fact. Medieval culinary innovations often focused on achieving refined textures, like the smooth mortrus or jellies, demonstrating a sophisticated aesthetic beyond mere sustenance. The lack of precise measurements in medieval recipes is an open scholarly debate. Were these recipes intended for highly skilled, intuitive cooks who understood implied quantities, or were they simply imprecise by our standards? When you attempt to reconstruct lumen papae, you lean into the idea that the medieval cook knew what enough looked and felt like. You're trying to embody that intuition rather than just mechanically following a blueprint. This often involves a process of educated guesswork, relying on historical culinary principles and a good deal of common sense. You might find yourself saying, "Okay, this feels sufficiently Pope-like now." A quirky or fringe tidbit in culinary reconstruction is the challenge of ghost flavors. These are flavors that might have been present in medieval ingredients, but are now almost impossible to replicate due to changes in agriculture, animal husbandry, or environmental factors. For example, medieval chickens or vegetables might have had a different taste profile than their modern counterparts. While you can't truly recreate a 15th century chicken, you attempt to capture the spirit of the original dish by focusing on the core, unique elements and methods. You learn to accept that your lumen papae will be a scientifically informed approximation, a tribute rather than an exact clone. You might even consider the serving vessel. While not part of the recipe itself, the presentation was crucial to the medieval experience. Would lumen papae have been served in a simple ceramic bowl or on a gleaming silver platter? The former suggests a quiet personal indulgence, the latter a public display of splendor. Given its name, you suspect the latter, probably on a plate so shiny it made the Pope squint. The reconstruction becomes an immersive experience, a bridge. Across centuries, you're not just cooking, you're engaging in a dialogue with a forgotten past, asking questions of ancient ingredients and techniques, and hoping for a delicious answer. It's a painstaking, often messy, but utterly captivating journey into the culinary heart of the Renaissance Vatican. The moment arrives. After weeks of careful research, sourcing, and painstaking experimentation, you finally hold before you a small, delicate portion of lumen papae, or at least your best 21st century approximation of it. The aroma wafts up, a gentle, slightly sweet scent, unlike anything you've ever smelled from a modern kitchen. It's subtle, hinting at the unique character of the manor, perhaps with a faint echo of any other very light spices you included. This isn't a robust, in-your-face fragrance. It's a whisper of something ancient and refined. You bring the spoon, perhaps a delicate silver one, to your lips. The first contact is surprising. The texture is exactly as you imagined, incredibly smooth, melting away almost instantly, leaving no graininess, just a delicate, cool sensation. It's like eating a cloud if clouds had a very subtle, sweet flavor. It's profoundly different from modern desserts, which often rely on strong fats or intense sugars for impact. This is all about subtlety, about an ephemeral quality. The taste follows. The manor, the star of the show, delivers a unique sweetness that is indeed gentle, almost fruity, with a hint of something faintly resinous or earthy beneath it. It doesn't punch you in the face with sugar, it barely kisses your palate. There's a clean finish, leaving your mouth refreshed rather than coated. If you added any other very mild flavorings like rosewater or a whisper of citrus, they would contribute a delicate floral or bright note, complementing the manor rather than overpowering it. It's a taste that speaks of purity and restraint, far removed from the boisterous flavors of other medieval dishes, or indeed most modern ones. This sensory experience offers profound implications. Firstly, it validates the historical accounts of manner's unique qualities. It's not just a legendary food, it delivers on its promise of a distinct, delicate sweetness. Secondly, it offers a tangible connection to the past. You are in essence tasting what a 15th century pope might have tasted, a fleeting moment of shared experience across half a millennium. It's a kind of culinary time travel, a direct line to the refined palate of a bygone era. You find yourself wondering if His Holiness savoured it as much as you do, or if he just gulped it down before moving on to the next weighty matter of church and state. This tasting experience highlights a mainstream historical fact. Medieval sweet dishes often prioritized subtle, natural sweeteners and delicate textures over the intense, concentrated sweetness common today. Before the widespread availability of cheap, refined sugar, sweetness itself was a luxury, and chefs employed a range of natural sugars like honey, fruit syrups, and manna to create dishes that celebrated these nuanced flavors. Lumen papaye fits perfectly into this tradition of sophisticated, less aggressively sweet confectionery. A quirky or fringe tidbit comes to mind as you savor the last bite. The medieval concept of digestibility. Dishes were often designed not just for taste, but for their perceived ease of digestion, especially for the elderly or infirm. A light, delicate dish like lumen papaye would have been considered highly digestible, perhaps even restorative. It wasn't just tasty, it was good for you according to medieval medical theories. You imagine the Pope's physician advising him to take a spoonful after a particularly heavy sermon, for the settling of humours and the lightness of spirit. An open, scholarly debate, further illuminated by this tasting, is the question of how much medieval palates were influenced by the philosophical or religious meanings attributed to food. Was lumen papaye truly prized for its delicate taste, or was its appeal more about its symbolic connection to heaven and papal authority? While you experience its inherent deliciousness, it's hard to fully separate the flavor from the profound historical and spiritual context. Did the Pope truly taste the light, or merely the exquisite manna? You suspect it was a potent blend of both, a culinary experience elevated by its profound significance. The reconstruction and tasting of lumen papaye becomes more than just a culinary experiment. It's a living testament to the lost arts of medieval gastronomy. It proves that within those dusty archives there aren't just dry historical facts, but vibrant sensory experiences waiting to be rediscovered. A delicious whisper from the past, inviting you to listen. Having tasted the light of the Pope, you're left with a profound sense of the enduring legacy of forgotten food. This journey into a 15th century Vatican cookbook has been more than a historical exercise. It's been a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles, but about the deeply human sensory experiences that connect us across centuries. Food, perhaps more than anything else, is a universal language, and a forgotten recipe is a forgotten dialect of that language, waiting to be relearned. What does this rediscovery truly tell us? It speaks volumes about the priorities of the time. It highlights a society where culinary skill was a high art, capable of blending the sacred with the mundane, symbolism with sustenance. It shows a world where rarity and perceived purity, like that of manna, held immense value, reflecting not just wealth, but a deeper spiritual connection to what was consumed. You learn that even in the most austere or pious settings, there was still room for extraordinary culinary indulgence, designed to elevate and impress. It's a delightful reminder that even the highest offices in the land, even popes, had palates, and sometimes those palates desired something truly unique. This entire experience underscores the often overlooked richness of medieval gastronomy. Far from being a bland, uninspired era of food, the Middle Ages and early Renaissance were periods of immense culinary creativity, driven by available ingredients, cultural beliefs, and technological constraints. They understood complex flavor, combinations, experimented with textures, and had a sophisticated approach to presentation, even if their tools were rudimentary. You begin to appreciate the medieval chef not as a simple cook, but as an artist, a chemist, and a logistical mastermind, constantly adapting to their environment and the demands of their patrons. The very act of reconstructing Lumen Papae also teaches you about the fragility of knowledge. How easily can such intricate recipes passed down through generations fade into obscurity? A fire, a careless rebinding, a change in stuff, or simply shifting tastes can erase centuries of culinary wisdom. It's a testament to the patient work of archivists and historians that fragments like this cookbook survive at all, silent witnesses to worlds long past. Every faded page, every wormhole, every smudged instruction tells a story of preservation and near loss. A mainstream historical fact that resonates deeply here is the power of written records to preserve intangible cultural heritage. Without this specific manuscript, the intricate details of Lumen Papae would be utterly lost to time, known only through vague historical allusions, if at all. It's a vivid demonstration of how something seemingly as simple as a cookbook can unlock profound insights into historical society, economy, and even belief systems. It's a far cry from your digital recipe apps, but arguably far more resilient over the long haul. Consider the quirky or fringe tidbit of how accidental discoveries often drive historical understanding. This cookbook wasn't found because someone was specifically looking for a forgotten papal recipe. It was a chance encounter, a researcher perhaps looking for something entirely different. So much of our understanding of the past comes from serendipitous moments like this, where a seemingly ordinary object turns out to hold extraordinary secrets. It's almost as if history hides these little treasures, waiting for the right sleepy explorer to stumble upon them. An open, scholarly debate, continually sparked by discoveries like Lumen Papae, is the extent to which we can ever truly recreate the historical experience of taste and aroma. While we can meticulously follow recipes and analyze ingredients, can we ever fully account for centuries of genetic drift in plants and animals, or the nuances of medieval cooking methods, or the differences in medieval palates shaped by unique diets and environmental factors? Your reconstruction of Lumen Papae is a powerful approximation, a sensory bridge, but the ultimate, authentic taste remains tantalizingly just beyond reach, a ghost of a flavor that only the 15th century popes truly knew. As the quiet of the archive deepens around you and the last vestiges of the manna's delicate sweetness fade from your memory, you realize that uncovering Lumen Papae isn't just about a lost recipe. It's about the enduring human desire for delight, for meaning, and for connection expressed through the universal language of food. It's a powerful whisper from the past, reminding you that history is alive, waiting to be savored. And now, as the gentle hum of forgotten kitchens softens into the quiet rustle of ancient pages, let your mind drift. The faint scent of old parchment and sweet manna begins to fade, replaced by the comforting, familiar air of your own space. The images of towering archives and bustling medieval cooks soften around the edges, becoming warmer, less distinct. You've journeyed through centuries tonight, explored lost flavors, and unearthed a hidden piece of history. Allow the murmurs of the past to become a gentle lullaby, carrying you deeper into tranquility. Let the light of the Pope guide your dreams to peaceful, restful slumber. Sleep deeply, sleep well.